Good morning. That's kind of loud. Unfortunately, having a couple technical difficulties, and I cannot get my PowerPoint up right now. So I'm just going to start talking, and hopefully this all loads, because my computer kind of crashed. So our topic here today is all about arcs and the importance of arcs, and specifically geared towards mystery thriller series, but a lot of the information can be adjusted and used in with whatever genre you're in based on these elements. So I am Lee. I have been publishing as l.t.ryan since 2012. And the first thing I came out with was my Jack Noble series. And through that series and how I built that out, I learned quite a bit. I'm a little slow this morning. I put my Apple Watch for the first time on the charger and it turned on. It was still in airplane mode, so it went off with an alarm at 7 a.m. East Coast time, and I've been up ever since. So what I'm going to talk about, the importance of arcs, particularly how they pertain to mystery thrillers. That is the world I live in. That is what I've developed. I have 7 or 8 series out at this point. And it is important to, whether you plot, whether you pants, it is a good idea to know who your character is, where your character is going, where your story is going, and where your series may be going, because there's a big difference in something that I winged along the way and something that we planned out, kind of a 9-book idea. And that difference is 7 out of 10 people purchasing the second book and 9 out of 10 people purchasing the second book. When I did the original series, I actually started off with what is now book 4, and I wrote it in 5 100-page installments with no clue what I was doing. After that, I wrote what is now book 1, and I kind of ping-ponged back and forth. I wasn't sure where I was kind of going with it. I knew I wanted backstory on the character, but I also wanted to continue with this arc, this idea of a character who was in a place where he had kind of bottomed out morally, bankrupt, and was on this redemption cycle. So I did kind of figure out, going from books 4 on, how to kind of work that cycle out. For this presentation, I'll be using examples primarily from the Jack Reacher series and Michael Connelly series. I know most people are familiar with that, whether they've read it, they've watched the movie, they've watched the TV show, and get a little bit of how those characters are developed, how they grow a little bit through the series, where they are from book 1 to book 3 to book 9. So when we start talking about an arc, it's like, what is an arc, right? And so when we define it, to me, there's 5 pieces to an arc, okay? And those will be your narrative, a character, emotional, we're almost here with my thing, and thematic, and your series, okay? And so narrative arc, you're going to know this as a different name in a second here, but basically your structural framework of a story, of a mystery thriller, of a romance, whatever. The narrative arc involves the introduction and thriller of a mystery or a conflict, okay? A series of escalating tensions and complications that your character, your protagonist, pursues as they're searching for the truth to the mystery or the resolution of whatever is driving that thriller. Sorry. Let me get back to my spot. And so when you look at this, this is plot, right? Your narrative arc is your plot. So most of us are already familiar with that. All right, so your character arc is going to refer to this internal journey that this character, your protagonist, or any character within the story is taking on the story. So in a mystery thriller, our protagonist may start with a certain worldview, a certain set of abilities, and with the events of the series, they're going to grow through and change, learn something new about themselves. And there are exceptions to this, and we'll get to that here too. So a detective may begin a series with a certain amount of hang-ups, troubled past, got in trouble, anger issues, so on. And as they continue to confront not only the mystery that they're going through themselves as well, they change throughout the story. And a great example of this is in Lethal Weapon, where you have the Martin Riggs character who in the beginning of the book is suicidal. He's trying to get himself killed on the job. In the middle of the story, you have what's called a mirror moment where he's facing his demon head on, and where is he going to go from that point? And he holds the barrel of his gun in his mouth. And then as we continue through the story, and as he and Martelle work together to solve this issue, this problem they're dealing with, at the end of the book, as a Christmas present, he gives Martelle the bullet, right? And that's his, one of the arcs of that character through that story. So, and when you effectively use this, and it allows the reader to connect and go on this emotional journey with, and they really start to see them as a full person. In my PowerPoint's up. Right, one sec. Yeah, where is it? Oh. Look at that. Let's see, we've actually got something here. All right, make it good. Get it caught up. We talked about that. All right. Oh, for Pete's sake. We don't want, when I slip and let out the F-bomb, we don't want that showing up there for the people online. Okay. So character arc, we talked about that. A great example of that character is one of my favorites when you're thinking about how can we take a character and really show them facing these amazing demons and turn it around and become the next person they're going to be on their journey. So the emotional arc, and so this is very similar. It's part of your character's arc, this emotional arc. It is their fear, their trust, their love, their hate, any emotion, as it develops in response to that plot. And you can go back to that same example with Martin Riggs and how he has to overcome his wife's passing and that wanting to let himself die there. Or if we're going to talk like a detective, like a grizzled detective can be detached from this mystery in the beginning or the victims of the crime and the family, but as they progress through the story, as they are becoming more emotionally invested in the crime that they're investigating, they become invested in the victim and the people surrounding the victim as well. And your thematic arc is the overarching themes or the messaging that you wish to explore through the course of a series. And like for me, I write fast-paced genre fiction. I am not exploring the greatest themes in the world, but it doesn't matter. I mean, because even good versus evil, a friend having your back, these themes connect with people over and over and over again. So never feel like you have to write the next great story idea with this beautiful theme, because what people want to read is the messaging that they've grown up and they've become accustomed to. And your series arc, when you're able to write in a series of books, certain genres is going to be different, but mystery thriller, you are, especially in traditional, you have a character and then a subset of characters that you're following along throughout, right? And so if you're in romance, it's hard to take the same two people through a dozen books. But you can use a town, you can use an organization, you can use a sports team, whatever, a group of friends, and continue the series arc as you're building up through that with the people in each story. And when we get to talking about like someone like Harry Bosch, you have a cast of characters that evolves, and they're meeting specific needs that he has within the story. But those characters, they have their own arcs too. And so as the story goes on, there's a lot of echo. You could have things that are like a personal vendetta, a complex conspiracy, With my Rachel Hatch character, she's got a father who was murdered when she was young, and at the end of the first book, she gets a new clue on that. So we have a series of events through different books where she's able to find this and solve that mystery as well. Okay, so that would cover there. Okay, so starting with a single book. And this is probably the biggest section. I think it's going to be the most important. So, what we have with the single book, the elements, that plot, right? The simple structure there of the inciting incident. We have a longer series, kind of we might call it a messy middle, but your rising tension through the story leading to a climax and then a resolution within that story. So our inciting incident, that event that kicks the story off, propels that protagonist into the main conflict or the mystery. So for an example of this, we'll start with the first Jack Reacher book. And what we have with that first book, the opening of that is one of my favorite openings. And he says, I was arrested at Eno's Diner at noon on a Friday. All right, you have no idea what's going on, but what happens is he is arrested in this small town in Georgia, as he's drifted into this town, never been there, no reason for him to be arrested at that moment. Another one could be like Gone Girl. We have a disappearance, right? This is going to kick that story off right from there. So our rising tension, this series of events and obstacles that our protagonist has to face and face down, solve, go through as they are moving through the story and creating that heightened suspense and the extra stakes for it. So with Reacher and Killing Floor, we have these events where he's falsely accused and imprisoned, right? So our tension begins with that arrest for a homicide that he didn't commit and knows nothing about. His efforts to clear his name and seek that justice, for the murder victim, who turns out to be his brother, propel the narrative forward. And so, now we've added a bit of that character arc and emotional arc within the story there. So as he progresses through, we continue to raise these stakes. In this small town, there's this counterfeiting ring going on. And it's a front for this massive operation. And the revelation, he's trying to track down this conspiracy and see how far-reaching and involved. And it does have significant interest. And it also works with the mystery of his brother's murder. The personal stakes, again, his brother's murder there, and threats and violence. He continues to face people everywhere he turns. Someone's trying to knock him down, take him out, beat him up. And a race against time, as they realize that there's a ticking clock. This is a great thing in a thriller, any kind of race against time where you have that clock beating down. You have to solve this before time runs out and he won't finish this mystery, he won't solve the conspiracy. And then finally, you have a lot of betrayals and twists, and these are very common within a mystery thriller. Trust. Trust is a central theme within these stories. And so each of these stages, Lee Child is able to escalate this tension by layering the personal motives, the ticking clock, the high-stake threats, the intricate plot twist. And, the result becomes a thriller that keeps readers turning pages, eager to see how Reacher's going to navigate this little town and all the dangers surrounding him, solve his brother's murder, and help the town there. Another example, Da Vinci Code, a different kind of thriller, right? A lot of high stakes, and he weaves all these ciphers, these things that he has to solve and figure out throughout that. So we have these cryptic codes, right? And so there's a good amount of intellectual tension within that. So whereas Reacher may be using a lot of brute force to get his way through a story, in these other kind of stories, it's more going to be a mind game. As each code, each puzzle that Langdon solves leads to the next thing. That stakes continue to rise each time he does this, and we have again that time pressure that keeps the story, keeps you moving, and it really. This kind of thing, this pressure, this time, the high stakes, it also helps increase that pacing, which is the thing that makes people never want to put that book down. And then We have them also through this part, being pursued by police. And so there's this constant threat of being caught, as they're moving constantly one puzzle to the next. The trust and betrayal again. They don't know who exactly they can trust anymore. And a struggle on multiple fronts. They're not just fighting a single person. They're up against, institutional power. The police are against them. A shadowy, well-resourced organization is up against them. And it adds complexity, and it continues to raise those stakes and that pressure against them. So throughout Da Vinci Code, all those elements rise to tension, it all intertwines, and the act of deciphering everything leads to even more danger, more puzzles as we continue through that plot. And so this is what makes up that whole middle part of your book, right? And so the next what we come to, our climax of the story, right? This peak moment in the story where conflict reaches this most intense point, right? And so in Killing Floor, we have this moment where the final moment of confrontation, revelation, and all the threads converge, right? We have these multiple threads going through a story that now all meet up at once. So how does he do that? How does Lee Child? So his showdown, he confronts the mastermind behind the counterfeit operation, learns the truth behind his death and the corruption in this small Georgia town, faces off against antagonists in a desperate effort to bring them to justice and avenge his brother. This is the culmination of his pursuit of truth, and we have a lot of emotional, intense stakes involved with there. This action-packed resolution, the peak of this, he's able to use all of his skills, his fighting skills, military training, investigative skills, and he's able to really just kind of dismantle everything he's facing, that whole organization that he's facing. You get very intense, visceral feeling scenes when we get into this climax part. This is the point where people are just going to be racing to get through that story. Rush of adrenaline kind of feeling, and honestly, that's one of my favorite things to hear from a reader is, especially I have a lot of older readers, and to hear from them, they couldn't sleep or they got their heart rate up again, or, that reminds them of when they did stuff like this. Things like that are always fun. Revelation, reckoning, so he's a force of reckoning anyone that gets in his way. And so the climax is that ultimate point where we take this whole breadth of the plot, that story, that everything he faced, and all at once we get a great emotional payoff because he helps the town, he helps the law enforcement there, and he solves his brother's murder. And then we also have the cost of justice. None of this is clean, right? It's got the cost of his quest. He achieves his goals, and he gets a clear sense of what's been sacrificed along the way. The lives lost, the toll that it takes on him. But this also, in addition to adding depth to the climax, it starts to give us a push to where we're going to take this character into another book. So the climax of Killing Floor, it brings to a head all the central conflicts within the story, internal and external, like what he's dealing with internally and what's happening in the community, to bring him to a point where the tension is the most unbearable before a release here. And then we're going to go to our next section. We'll just go to the climax here, the resolution. This is where our conflict's resolved. The mystery is explained, the thriller, the conspiracy is stopped, and the story is brought to a conclusion that leaves the reader satisfied. And so, everything that we have happening within the story, it ties it up and provides closure. So the aftermath of the showdown is going to be after the intense, Reacher confronts, neutralizes everything, and there is a wind down period. It deals with the cleanup of the activities, the healing process that begins for him, for the town's occupants. Legal and moral resolution. Whoever we've got left over, it's got to be taken care of, go to jail, the law takes over. And we also establish in this series, Reacher's brand, his vigilante justice and how that transitions into what law enforcement has to do after that. His personal closure in this story, obviously with having to deal with his brother's death and solve that, that's going to bring his closure there. And, there's this moment where he can reflect. We've winded down to the point where the tension isn't there, the stakes aren't as high. He can slow down and reflect. And now we also have, because this is going to be a series, we're setting the stage for his future adventures. For a guy like that, he's always going to be on the move. He's going to go to his next town. He's leaving behind all the connections he made in this one place and going to the next. And then so the recovery, the restitution and recovery, the town begins its process of healing and dealing with the aftermath as Reacher goes on his own way. So what the resolution of this, it ensures that the drama was resolved. Readers are left with enough interest with Reacher that they want to continue on his next adventure. We'll give a quick another example here is, Silence of the Lambs, how that they are able to restoration of order, capturing of the antagonist, the relief and satisfaction. You've gone through a whirlwind in that story. And so for the reader to get to that point, it allows that tension built up. Now it finds that release. This is all about what you're doing here at the end and the complexity of good versus evil within this story. And then we also have Clarice's personal growth, like everything that she's gone, the challenges she's faced of proving who she is, evolving her identity as an FBI agent, and then also her inner conflicts, her resolution, all come through everything she's faced through the story in this wind down period. So pacing and suspense building throughout this. So effective pacing, it just ensures that the story unfolds at a pace that keeps readers engaged. And that's going to be different for every genre and even different stories in different series. One of the best examples I can find is a Patterson story. Because a Patterson story, if you ever read one and outline it along the way, there's a very specific heartbeat to that story. And he ramps up that tension enough throughout, but then drops it to a point where you can take a breath. But before that's done, it shoots right back up. In Killing Floor, in any Reacher story, we have the same kind of thing. But in this first one, we're introduced to Jack, the ex-military policeman arrested for murder, and drawn into that case. So we have that pacing. It's immediately set when he's arrested. And then the events that happen through that next 20% of the story. And then from there. So it's a very punchy kind of story. And the language, the way that he writes it as well is very punchy. So when you're dealing with pacing, you can use a short staccato sentences, mix it up a little bit, your dialogue short and snappy, everything that keeps that reader going. So the character development within a single book, so even within the confines of that, they will go growth or change. And one of the interesting things about Reacher is it kind of bucks this trend because through most of the books, Jack Reacher is the same guy every time. The world is changing around him, and so he has to adapt. I mean, the guy travels with a toothbrush and a couple dollars in his pocket. So it's an essential part where he goes. But he does develop through each story as his brand of vigilante justice continues to grow and evolve there. And as we see his skills as an investigator, his physical prowess, and his reasoning develop and how he handles everything that's thrown at him. And through every challenge he faces, his character's tested, his personal code of ethics is defined, and we see him have to face this over and over and over again. So when we look at kind of a case study of all of what we just talked about within a single book there, we have that, again, the inciting incident, arrested, the rising tension, everything he faces throughout that next part of the story as he tries to take down a conspiracy and solve his brother's murder. That climax, that final moment where you have a couple chapters where he's got to take everything down and face it all at once, that is just a rush. And then that resolution where counterfeit ring is disbanded, the arrest, and the healing for Reacher and for the town. And then our pacing in the character development. Like if you haven't read this book, it's a great book to read to see how Lee Child does this. It's one I've read multiple times, and it really did help form how I wanted to do things as well. So now, moving forward, so how do we carry this over into looking at, I like to do things in threes when we plan now, and then look at a whole 9, like what is gonna happen throughout 9 books. Like, had it right from the beginning, I knew how one of the emotional arcs for Rachel Hatch would end in book 9. And it did piss a lot of readers off because of how we built that, but it is essential to that character's next set, her next arc through the next 3 books, her next arc through book 18. So we have ways to do this, and if we look at Harry Bosch, this is another great one with how this has been built out. Our overarching mystery and conflict, our individual contributions from each book to the larger story, and the character progression over these 3 books. So with Bosch, we have his first 3 books. So you're introduced to this character. You learn that he was a Vietnam veteran. He was what was called a tunnel rat. They used to go in and try to find the guys that were hiding underground in Vietnam. He also has a hell of an attitude. So we have in that first book, if we're looking at how we're building this, your understanding of this character, we learn a lot about that. So in the second one, we have themes of corruption, drug trafficking, testing his cynicism and idealism and how he faces the world and the crimes around him. He's not opposed to going outside the law to solve a problem, and it's something that he has to deal with through a lot of the books. And then in Concrete Blonde, which is the third book, again, his past resurfaces, and he's dealing with the fallout from previous case where he, dealing with a serial killer and shot somebody. So Michael Connelly built out a way to carry the character and the narratives from multiple books into the next one, and it does give you a sense of knowing. And if you've watched the show that they did on Amazon, they didn't just do a series based on one book. They took multiple books that all had tie-ins to each other and created each season based on that. So expanding this to 9 books, you're looking at, what are your long-term planning? How do you keep readers engaged? What are evolving threats and challenges, and how do you connect these threads? So with Bosch, it's significant plot points carry through each book. One of the things that continues to go through is his mother's murder. His mother was a prostitute, was murdered when he was young. It was never solved, and he's always trying to solve this case. It's always in the background for him. So those threads, it carries a reader through, and it keeps them wanting to solve this mystery, this emotional arc that he's been going on. And to keep readers engaged through those books, Connelly offers a mix of standalone investigations in each book. Each book is going to have its own plot, its own mystery to solve, and then the evolution of the character. His challenges and threats that evolve throughout the time, that escalate through the series, tracking down a killer to solve, a serial killer, to facing the Chinese triads, and even uncovering institutional corruption within the police department there. And as he ages too, and this cast of characters that he's had along with him continues to change and provides additional, what would you call it, fodder, something new for the readers there to continue with and learn a new character. So you do want to try to avoid repetitiveness. You don't want the same plot line over and over and over again. People do get comfortable, and they want to follow a kind of a rhythm, but you still need to be able to change it up. Stagnant characters, you want them to grow. You want them to face new challenges. You want things in their life to go wrong. Just like in a book where you're piling on that character, those sets of characters to make their life miserable, you want to continue to do that through a series as well. You give them a little break at the end of a book, but then the next one is going to be terrible. And at the same time, you don't want to overcomplicate what you're doing next. And that can be a tough one, because sometimes you do feel like when you're at book 15, you do feel like I've done this before, but you don't want to go too far and make it something that just doesn't make sense within there. Inconsistencies, whatever you can do to keep track. A lot of people series Bibles. I like to think that I keep it all up in my head here, but doesn't always work that way. And pacing elements, balancing between the slow burn to give the reader a break, and then maintaining that fast, quick momentum. So, looking at a series arc case study for Reacher, so with the first 3 books, we are introduced to this ex-military investigator, this nomadic lifestyle, and it's going to lead him into various confrontations with his own personal confrontations and then broader societal evils. So in Killing Floor, Reacher, Innocent to Justice, all right, we're introduced, we learn how he is and who he is. In Die Trying, we start to see how his resilience and resourcefulness when facing a kidnapping and domestic terrorism. And then in the 3rd book, we get a little bit more of a layer building on to this character's past, who he was, his father's history, his own military background. So this progression, we have someone that just evolves from a lone wanderer who doesn't want to be left alone, who realizes that when he does get involved, even if he doesn't want to, it's this impact he has on lives and the broader societal issues that he's facing. In 4 to 6, he's starting to mature. We have a overarching conflict that he confronts different forms of injustice while his personal ethos is challenged and refined. In Running Blind, we have a serial killer testing his analytical skills, like kind of a cat and mouse bit. In Echo Burning, we're in Texas now, and he's facing racial prejudice and domestic abuse in a small Texas town where it is always hot. And without fail, we've upped the stakes a lot in this one, because they found him to protect the Vice President of the United States. So again, this guy that wants to be left alone now is being pulled into something, and he still has that sense of duty, and this pops up throughout the series. And when we get to 7 and 9, now we're going more into his military past. Things that happened in the past start popping up in these stories. A new kind of story. Again, we're keeping it fresh, we're keeping it new without becoming too overcomplicated or rehashing the same stories each time. So in Persuader, you have a revenge plot that comes up, tests his limits, and brings up a bunch of connections from his military past. In The Enemy, which is actually one of the Reacher books that goes back in time, it's from his military days, and we have more insight into who he was and what led him to become this drifter, the events that sparked that off. And then in One Shot, it really is, his detective skills are really put to the test, because he shows up to put a sniper away and then has to prove that guy was innocent. So his progression continues, more confronting of his history, the things in the past, the things that, he's drifting, right? He's trying to leave a lot behind in these revelations about his character. So by the end of that 9th book, his journey has taken him across the United States. He's faced off a multitude of adversaries. He has grown not only his capability to confront these threats, but also understanding of his world and his place in it. And Child does a great job keeping this character fresh. Even though it's a character that doesn't change a lot, you're revealing more about his backstory and shape that worldview and how the world around him continues to change. And so in the endgame strategy basically for it's not about, each individual story. Once you read through this far, it's his quest to find this purpose outside of the military, even though he didn't know that was what he wanted. Let's get through this one. Let's see. So our protagonist arc, as we go through, in a single book, when we have personal stakes and growth, it's very much tied to that plot that's right there. So we can grow emotionally, morally, professionally, and we should have that evidence by the end of that book when we get to the resolution as they're looking back on everything. So killing Flora again, from that ex-cop wandering to someone taking a personal stake, he becomes emotionally invested in this even though he doesn't want to. By the end of the book, we know that this guy's going to continue on everywhere he goes. He's going to find trouble, and he's going to step up, even if he doesn't want to, and take care. Over a couple books there, we deepen that complexity. We layer in more of the past, we layer in more of what they're trying to do in the future, and reveal more complexities about that person. And then the relationships that evolve. In Bosch, we have a lot of continuing relationships with the antagonists are not only the people he faces, but you have continuing antagonists in the form of his police chiefs. And then you have his buddies or the cops that he works with, and they shift over time. And you also have his relationship to his job as it evolves as well, when he goes from being younger and heavily involved in the department to being in cold cases. And so over 9 books, the evolution, it really should be substantial when you look back at a Bosch, at a Reacher. Who were they when they first started? Where are they at that point? What has changed in their life? What has changed about their beliefs? Who are they now? So with Bosch, like I said, driven detective, to someone at the end of that who's more jaded than before, the complexities of everything he's done, what he's facing, and those personal relationships. You see it evolve with Bosch, you see it evolve with his ex-wife, with his daughter, how it continues to grow. And keeping them, fresh and engaging, we want those new challenges, new experiences, and we want the consistent traits that exist, but also the different settings vying to keep that character fresh with a Reacher-type character. So the evolution is kind of a case study here, but it's a quick one. So in Black Echo, we have Bosch, who's introduced, detective with a haunted past, and we have a case that comes up that reconnects him with that past, what he faced when he was in Vietnam. After 3 books, more developed, he's starting to struggle with his job, with the conflicts about what he's doing, how his job works, and also the personal life. We're introduced more that's going on within his personal life. And then at 9 books, we see, again, that he's aging. There's changes in the police force. He's got a younger partner. He wants to mentor younger detectives. And again, he can never get away, though. He continues to want to be a part of this, and that's what he starts doing, the cold cases, and we go back to him eventually solving and completing that character and emotional arc of his mother's death. And that was the last slide. I wish we had more time for questions. Does anybody have any questions to start with there? And it can be about this. It can be about, if you have questions about advertising and marketing in relation to this, I can also answer that kind of stuff. No. Did I create a series arc for Jack Noble when I initially started? No. Like I said, I started with a 100-page story, and I liked it, and I was like, I'm going to keep doing this. And it's not true. I mean, I did have an idea of this character because my mother-in-law moved out to Snowshoe, West Virginia, and we would go out there, and there's this radio observatory called Green Bank, and it's radio silence around it, like no cell phones, anything like that. And I used to always think maybe there's some like CIA training program back there. And so the backstory for the character was he went through something like that, pulled out of the military to go through something like that. And he, it was kind of like this amalgamation of a Reacher, of a Jason Bourne, Jack Bauer kind of character. So after I finished the first one, I knew I wanted to explore more of that backstory. So I initially wanted it to be 2 different series, an ongoing like epic saga, and then these first books that kind of delve like prequel almost. So that's why I ping pong back and forth. So, and even now, like it's strange because I don't plot these ahead of time. I know where I want to go, and a lot of them will be multi-character, multi-point of view. And a lot of times I don't know like how it's all gonna meet up in the middle and connect. And I like that rush when I get there, like when that happens. But everything I co-write, we don't do it like that. Like I can break the system, nobody else can. So we do like to have everything much more plotted out, much more planned out, and know where we're gonna go, at least at a 3-book kind of level. And then once we get to that point, with Hatch, we had 9 books planned, and we actually they ramp up, right? Just like a story's going to ramp. The first book, second book, third book. In the third book, she's on the other side of the world solving her father's death in this big conspiracy. We wanted to keep going, and I said, I've already got that. Let's bring her right back to the hometown she left 15 years ago again. And, we readjusted, and it fit in very well, and it allowed us to kind of change that story. So I like to keep a lot of flexibility within whether it's plotted or not.
If you're using something other than a character to connect your series, like a small town or whatever else, do you need to show that evolving in the same way that you would with a character?
I think you would. Like any setting is going to change over time. The people, the faces who are involved. I think you would showcase. I don't write romance, but I think you could showcase that cast, that setting, the people within to show the evolution, the changing of the world, the things that everybody is facing, and I think that would help keep it fresh for anybody.
Thank you again for coming and speaking. 2 questions. The PowerPoint, will that be available to access on 20Books?
Yeah, I do, and I will give them that, and I also have a couple handouts I've used in other presentations that, if you're interested in thrillers, it's called the anatomy of a thriller, and how we write these, how we plan these, how I write it, and then I also have a really great handout on AMS. So I'm going to give them to have that and this PowerPoint and my notes as well.
Awesome, thank you. And then my second question is, in terms of multiple protagonists over maybe a 7-9 book series, any advice on how to develop those characters, or any insight?
Well, sure. I mean, it's the same thing as that first book, right? They're going to have to start in one place and end up in another. There's a great book out there called The Mirror Moment by James Scott Bell, and he goes into really great depth on how your character starts, what they have to face in the middle, what demon, what challenge they have to face, and how they get to the end. And so you think about that in the same way when we talk about 3 books to 9 books, the same kind of thing. They're going to evolve and come up and face these challenges throughout that evolve them. The Noble series is one where there are multiple. We have our main protagonist, but there's multiple in there as well. She just said our time's up, but if you guys want to ask, I can talk still.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll go over there. Thank you.